Hear me if I'm talking this? Okay. So hi everyone. Today it's my pleasure to introduce Sahas Barve, our seminar speaker and Storer lecturer this year. This is an endowed lecture that commemorates Robert Storer, who was curator of birds at UMMZ for about 40 years and also a leading 20th century ornithologist. He also has another talk at RMC tomorrow at 10:30, so please stop by for that if you're interested. I first saw Sahas give an ornithology seminar almost 10 years ago when I was an undergrad and he was finishing his PhD. I remember wanting to emulate him even back then. In fact, one of Sahas's PhD papers, which relates nesting biology, life history, and evolution of migration in Old World passerines, has a number of connections to my dissertation, and it was one of the first that I read when I started my literature review as a PhD student. So one of the things I've always found most impressive about him is that he's published in a very wide range of topics in ornithology, including evolutionary biology, behavioral ecology, life history, feather structure, and elevational distributions of montane birds. We get to hear about multiple of those this week. Sahas earned his bachelor's degree at Mumbai University and master's degree at the Wildlife Institute of India. Before earning his PhD at Cornell University, post-PhD, he did postdoctoral work on acorn woodpeckers at Hastings Reserve in California with Old Dominion University and was a Peter Buck Fellow at the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. Through all this work, he's maintained a commitment to fieldwork, natural history, conservation, and diversity in science, which I think are sources of inspiration and motivation for all of us. And now he's the John Fitzpatrick Director of Avian Ecology at Archbold Biological Station in Central Florida, where he oversees research on one of the United States' most remarkable long-term study systems, as we'll be hearing shortly. So without further ado, please welcome Sahas.
Thank you so much, Max, and thank you so much for the invitation. I've had just a fantastic time talking to so many of you. I've been chatting with you guys individually throughout the day, so thanks for coming. Can you hear me? You probably can't hear me yet. Is this better? Yeah. It is better. Okay. Great. Okay, hopefully this worked before, so hopefully it'll work again. Hello, I'm Sahas Barve, and I'm the Program Director of Avian Ecology at Archbold. How many of you have seen a Florida scrub jay? Raise your hands. Oh, great. How many of you have heard about a Florida scrub jay? Who has not heard about a Florida scrub jay before? I guess no one's perfect, but let's move on. So this is what a Florida scrub jay looks like. It's a really cool bird, and I hope I inspire you to come out and see a Florida scrub jay by the end of this talk. So I study Florida scrub jays at Archbold Biological Station, where we study them really intensively. And before I tell you about the project itself, let me tell you a little bit more about the system or Archbold as the place. But even before I do that, I forgot that I'll be using a lot of these illustrations by Annika Chaffee, who was a wonderful art illustration intern at Archbold. And so I'm going to use a number of illustrations she made for this amazing Florida scrub jay comic that we've produced. All right, so this is Archbold Biological Station. It is a literal train station. You can see the tracks right here. And it was built as a train station so that someone else could build a giant mansion right here. But that giant mansion never got built, and Archbold was preserved as a natural history reservation. It's 10,000 acres in size, and almost all of it is natural habitats. A huge chunk of it is Florida scrub, which looks like that from the air. It's a lot of short vegetation with interspersed with pine trees, and I'll tell you more about that soon. Archbold, as an NGO, all our work is based on these 4 conservation pillars: saving the rest of the rare, sustaining grasslands, connecting large landscapes, and then there's this one that we're trying to come up with a better name for you might know why. So that's what working at an NGO means, is that we sort of have to work around those conservation pillars and the mission of the NGO. I'm going to talk about Florida scrub jays and Florida scrub jays only, but that's not the only bird that we study at Archbold. We also study and have long-term data sets for red cockaded woodpeckers and Florida grasshopper sparrows, both of which are federally endangered birds. And we study these two species on military lands. So we study them at a huge active bombing range called the Avon Park Air Force Range, which is a 100,000 acre facility with cool populations of both those species and scrub jays as well. Okay, so let's go through the outline of the talk. I'm going to talk about the bird itself. I'll tell you a little bit about some really fun, cool research that an intern and then an RA did in the lab that made us rethink what we knew about Florida scrub jays. We'll talk about some field-based application of the data that we collect for conservation of Florida scrub jays, and then end with some sort of future research directions for the program. All right. What I also want you to take away from this talk is the importance of field stations and field research as incubators for future ecologists, how field-based data that is collected can be directly applied for conservation of species, and sort of brag about Archbold's multi-layer data set, so maybe some of you will come and work at Archbold. All right, so let's start about scrub jays. Scrub jays are a cooperatively breeding bird, which means that more than two individuals, the mom and the dad, are helping raise offspring. And so each scrub jay family social group is a family group with an adult male and an adult female. These are adult male. There's a breeder and a female breeder, and there might be male or female adult helpers. So these are individuals that are physiologically adults but have not dispersed away from their natal territory and are helping at least one of their biological parents raise their siblings, right? So there's main breeder pair, a bunch of helpers, up to 6 helpers in a group, and then there are young of the year. And so right now we have all the groups have some juveniles, and all of these juveniles, if they make it to April 1st, they all get a promotion to helper. So that's how the system works. This is an iconic photo that sort of explains the helpers at the nest sort of cooperative breeding strategy. And if you look closely, this is a photo from the 1984 book by Wolfenden and Fitzpatrick. You actually see 1, 2, and 3 adults that are brooding over the young. And this is sort of used multiple times in the cooperative breeding literature because it shows that at least one of these adults is taking care of non-descendant kin. And why they do that was sort of the genesis of the study that started in 1969. But also, Florida scrub jays are one of the rare examples of birds where the helpers actually increase the reproductive success of the parents. So the helpers actually help. In most cases, helpers don't help. And so that early research by Glenn Wolfenden that described the Florida scrub jay system as blessedly simple because there's one simple pair and some helpers. The helpers are increasing the reproductive success of the adults was a great way of looking at more complicated models of inclusive fitness. Florida scrub jays are federally threatened, and that means that 90% of Florida scrub jay habitat is already gone. 90% of the population of Florida scrub jays is already gone. And they remain as on these chunks of extremely isolated patches of habitat called the Florida oak scrub. So Florida oak scrub looks like that. It's a beautiful, beautiful habitat, but it doesn't look like much because most of the biomass of the Florida oak scrub is under the ground. So this is a pyrogenic habitat. It burns regularly, and we'll come to that later. But it's dominated by palmettos and scrubby oaks and a lot of open sand, which is actually ecologically really, really important for Florida scrub jays to cache acorns in. Each Florida scrub jay pair requires about 25 acres of land, of oak scrub. So they have extremely large territories for their body size, and so if you are maintaining a large healthy population of Florida scrub jays, they can act as a wonderful umbrella species for a host of other rare and endangered Florida scrub inhabitants, like a bunch of these plants. Here's some bluebells. This is a endemic scrub endemic mint called Dicerandra, Ziziphus. There's sand skinks and beach mice and a bunch of other cool animals that live in the scrub in where scrub jays are found. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the long-term study of Florida scrub jays at Archbold. This is where Archbold is. Archbold sits at the southern edge of this big ancient sand dune ridge that runs along the sort of the spine of Florida. It's called the Lake Wales Ridge, and we are at the southern end of that ridge. We are in our 57th year of continuous data collection, and the program was started by Glenn Wolfenden, who was a professor at University of South Florida, and then by Reed Bowman, who worked at Archbold full time. We have a completely color band, or well, almost completely color band population. At any given time, we have 95% of all our scrub jays are color banded, and we can individually recognize them. We do very intensive demography where we find every nest and band every nestling of every pair every year, and we've been doing that for the last 57 years. So as soon as we find a nest, we track that nest weekly. We band every chick on day 11. Every fledgling is tracked weekly until it's nutritionally independent at day 75-ish. And then every individual is later censused every month. So what that gives us is this extremely detailed pedigree, now 17 generations deep, of how everyone is related to everyone. So we are now, this is actually, that number is unfortunately now up to 9444, because there's like a couple of unbanded birds that have moved in, which are a big nemesis for me, because trying to get them caught and banded is really, really important. But we know a lot about this population. We basically know how everyone is related to everyone all the time. Because scrub jays really respond well to little morsels of peanuts, you can get them to come really close to you, and they let you read bands really well, and that lets us do this like incredibly detailed census. So what we do every month is we go out, and in a 2 to 3 hour period, we are able to visit all the groups of scrub jays and individually recite about 95% of the population. And we go the next day, and we try to mop up whoever wasn't seen. And if a bird wasn't seen for 2 months in a row, then we kill them in the population, and less than 5% of those birds are ever seen again. So we know the survival probability and monthly survival data for each individual, and that's true for about 6,000 individuals in the population. Scrub jays have this really cool mutualism with the scrub oaks that they live with, and each scrub jay caches about between 5,000 and 8,000 acorns individually in the ground. And so the acorn crop of the year, we go out and measure acorns at the hottest time of year. That's the only plant work we do, and it's at the worst time. But that's when we can count acorns, and our acorn crop measurements are a great predictor of overwinter survival in Florida scrub jays. Of course, all that is impossible without a number of people, and so we have 4 interns and RAs and other volunteers in the lab, and this is just the cover of the JCrew catalog for 2025. The other cool thing is that those 4 interns also get to do independent research as part of their internship. And so we often give people their first chance or first taste of independent research, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit. Okay, so with that, let's move on to the next part of the talk, which is revisiting inheritance. So scrub jays live in a network of territories. These territories have invisible boundaries to us, but you have to come and see to believe how territorial these birds are. They know exactly where their boundaries are, and you can literally draw a line in the sand, and they will not cross it. and they will punish anyone who does cross it mistakenly. So this is a map of a territory. This is our territory map for 2023. On each territory is a highly, highly monogamous pair of Florida scrub jays. So you can't start breeding until you become a territory holder. But once they become a territory holder, they are extremely monogamous. The rates of extra pair paternity in Florida scrub jays are lower than in humans, and we have contraception. So they are really, really faithful to each other. So how do helpers, these adult offspring that haven't left the territory, become breeders in the first place? So there are 4 ways in which you can become a breeder. The first is to just fight with other pairs. So you pair with a female, or if you're a male, you pair with a female. If you're a female, you pair with a male, and go out and just battle it out and like carve out a small territory in the network of territories that exists. And we call that de novo territory formation. The most common way of becoming a breeder is just waiting for someone to die. So you just wait for a same-sex breeder to die in the population, and you go and pair with that widowed bird. And so when I said they're monogamous, they're sequentially monogamous. They're not, yeah. So you can replace a same-sex breeder when they die, but there is a third type of, there's also complete territory inheritance, where both of your parents die, luckily enough, and then you're old enough to breed, so you just attract a mate and you're all set. But then there's another way to do that, which is territorial budding. And this is something that was first described with Florida scrub jays, but now is known in a lot of territorial animals, including famously Seychelles warblers also. So in territorial budding, what happens is that the helpers and mom and dad fight with other jays to expand their territory. So the parents expand the territory and eat into other jays' territory, and then the helper attracts a novice breeder and sort of keeps the back 40 as their own territory. So this is called territorial budding. And up until 2023, in our data set, there were only 6 instances out of 127 instances of budding that were assigned to females. Okay, there were only 6 female buds until then. Then came Sarah Beers. Sarah started as an intern and then was a RA in the lab. She now studies fairy wrens in Australia with Dai Shizuka. And Sarah was really interested in understanding why those 6 females budded in the first place. Like, why is that behavior so rare? What was so special about those 6 females? And then she started looking at how we define buds, and she realized that it was really subjective, how we were calling something a territorial bud. So she came up with a pretty objective way of defining a bud, which is you have a natal territory, and this is your breeding territory. And if there's an overlap between your natal territory and breeding territory, we call it a bud. So there's like some overlap. There's some partial inheritance of the natal territory. All right, great. So then what she did was we have those territory maps, and then she overlaid 45 years of territory maps on top of each other and quantified how much if any of the helpers inherited their natal territory and how much of the natal territory they inherited. With that, she found out that actually 42 out of 139 instances of inheritance were female. So by looking at it objectively and having an open mind, we found out that almost 25% of all known territory inheritances in our populations were females. Okay, so this table is a little complicated. Let me walk you through some things. So females inherit territories most often when both of their parents die. That's like the most common way of getting a territory. But they also get territory by buds, and the way they bud is really interesting. So while budding in general is more common in males, and males benefit from budding much more than females. So males sort of inherit a bigger percentage of their natal territory, and the natal territory makes up a bigger percentage of their new territory. So they definitely benefit more in the form of how much territory they get from their parents. But females do something totally different and unexpected. They bud by pairing with a widowed neighbor. So what they do is, if there's a female helper and this female breeder dies, she not only pairs with the neighboring breeder, but also eats into her parents' territory and inherits a little bit of their territory. So they've actually come up with this like new way of becoming a breeder and inheriting their own territory, which was completely unknown for the 56 years of research that we had done before that. So in conclusion, territory inheritance is much more common in male scrub jays still. Females are, it's a sex-biased dispersal system where females typically disperse away from their natal territory. But when they do stay back, they can benefit from it. Females just inherit much more frequently than we thought, and it all depends on sort of luck and then them showing the flexibility to not move away, but to capitalize on opportunities that they have breeding right there. The last and probably biggest takeaway for me, at least, was that these like objective approaches and new people thinking about the same problem again is really, really important in behavioral ecology to fully understand these complicated behaviors. All right. So the next part is called fiery conservation, and I'm going to talk about Florida scrub jay, more basic Florida scrub jay biology that is applied to conservation. So this is what a prescribed burn looks like. Florida is incredibly flat, and so this photo was taken from one of the highest points in Florida. But we do these prescribed fires, and they help grow not only the Florida oak scrub, but also Florida scrub jays. All the data that I'm going to talk about today is absolutely and purely put together by these two people, our land manager, Kevin Main, and our burn boss and the director of data and technology at Archbold, Vivian Sclatter. Okay, so starting in the 1970s, ecologists finally realized that fire wasn't a bad thing all the time. And so we went from an era of fire control to fire management. And about 10 to 20 years later, once we started accepting fire as a good thing sometimes, we started seeing the benefits of it, right? So Morgan Tingley wrote this paper in 2016 that showed that bird diversity was higher in patches of forests in the West, where pyrodiversity was higher. So pyrodiversity was a direct predictor of bird species richness. Another animal that benefits from fires are koalas, and we have had some of these like mega fires in Australia, and a lot of people were really worried about what was happening to the koalas that couldn't run away. But in fact, in some patches after a mega fire, koalas actually increase in density. So some aspect of fire ecology is really beneficial for koalas. The cool thing about Florida is that it's the lightning strike capital of the world. So there are more lightning strikes in peninsular Florida than anywhere else in the world. In fact, there are 1.2 million lightning strikes in Florida alone. I don't know if you got that, sorry. But what that creates is a mosaic of time since fire. And this mosaic of time since fire is really, really important for Florida ecology. And let me show you sort of a schematic of what that looks like. So different habitats burn at different rates in Florida. So prairies burn every 1 or 2 years. Rosemary balds, which are the highest and driest habitats, burn every 30 to 40 years, and there's everything in between. So when you look at a landscape, you might have areas within that landscape that are 8 years since fire, 5 years since fire, 32 years, so there's this mosaic of time since fire in the landscape, and that is incredibly critical for maintaining biodiversity in Florida. And I'll talk to you about how it pertains to Florida scrub jays. Now that we can't let wildfires just rage in our landscape, what we do is we control wildfires, but we do prescribed burning to sort of mimic what the natural fire ecology would be at a much smaller scale. So in this map, the darker colors are fires that happened more recently, and the lighter colors are fires that happened more in the past. And so these you can see that in the west here, there's a lot of dark color, and that's because a lot of that is prairie, which we burn every year. So we try to mimic what the natural fire cycle was by looking at what the response of the animals is. And so one of those animals that we study, of course, is the Florida scrub jay. And beginning in 1979, actually, here's data from 83 onwards, we embarked on this really long-term experiment in 150-acre plot where we let scrub jays, quote unquote, die out until there is basically only one territory left in that whole 150 acres, right? And so we did that in 1983, it came down, and then we burnt that plot in 1990. And you see this incredible demographic response by Florida scrub jays over the next 10 years, where in the same habitat, in the same area of habitat, you can get 6 times as many Florida scrub jays as there were before the fire. But incredibly enough, those scrub jays, after doing really well for about 4 years, start tanking again. So about 12 years after a fire, they start tanking again, and they're back to 1 in about 20 years. And then we burn it again, and we see the same reaction again. So this reliance of Florida scrub jays on fire adds another layer to Florida scrub jay conservation, because you can't just set aside land and forget about it. You need to actively manage it to manage Florida scrub jay populations. Now, each fire is created differently, and prescribed burning is an incredible art and a science. So here's an aerial view of the same unit after those 1990 and 2010 fires. And you can see that the 1990 fire was a much more complete fire. And in 2010, there were large pieces of habitat that were left unburnt. And we were really, really interested in whether this pattern of increase in abundance after a fire and if other factors like intensity of fire and seasonality of fire and the extent of fire, what percentage of the fire unit that was burnt predicts how many scrub jays we'll get after a fire. Okay, so we map everything at Archbold at a scale of 5-meter resolutions. The whole 10,000 acres is gridded down to 5-meter squares, and each of those squares has a history associated with it. There's fire history, there's dominant vegetation, there's scrub jays, there's gopher tortoises, there are rare plants, all layered on top of each other at that 5-meter scale. So let's take a small subsection of that entire 5-meter grid. You can overlay a fire unit on that 5-meter grid, and then you instantly have a history of that entire fire unit, and then you'll know when that fire unit burnt. You can go in and measure what percent of that fire unit, which is our sort of the unit at which we burn and do prescribed fires. So you can tell what percentage of that unit burnt with what intensity and so on and so forth, and how it relates to time since fire with the other adjacent units and all that. You can also overlay scrub jay territories on top of that to then understand how a Florida scrub jay territory varies within itself. So what are the characteristics of Florida scrub jay territories with regards to time since fire and dominant vegetation type, the intensity of the last fire, so on and so forth. So everything is done at that 5-meter scale. Now, the question is this pattern universal? Do Florida scrub jays always bounce back and show this quadratic response to fire, to time since fire? And the answer, after crunching data for 11 fire units and 686 burn unit years, is yes. Again and again, across all these fire units, Florida scrub jays peak at 10 years post-fire, and then they start tanking again and again. And it's this incredibly consistent response that scrub jays show across the whole station, which is like, even I didn't think it was going to be this clear. So the big takeaways from this is that units at least double the scrub jays. So not all of them get 6 times as many scrub jays, and it sort of depends on how much oak scrub they have within that fire unit. But units at least double their scrub jays about 10 years since after a fire than before. High intensity fires, when fires are really slow and hot and really cook the vegetation, are bad. Scrub jays like patchy fires, patchy cold fires. And so high intensity fires end up having fewer territories than low intensity fires. And that the proportion of oak, obviously, proportion of oak scrub in the unit also is a big determinant of how many territories will come to occupy. So you can also tease that further and think about seasonality of burns. So when do you burn to maximize the number of scrub jays you get? And overall, you might think that dormant season burn, so the blue lines are dormant season burn. A dormant season burn probably gives you the best response, but that is completely based on seasonality. So, and the habitat. So high oak habitats actually don't bounce back as well after a dormant season burn as do transition and growing season burns. So if you are a land manager burning mostly flatwoods or prairie, burn it in the dormant season. If you're burning a mostly scrub oak fire unit, burn it in the growing season. So I wanted to show you, and this is the one animation I have, I wanted to show you how these scrub jays actually crowd into a unit right after it burns. So what I want you to watch is, so the underlying gray polygon is the unit 50. That's the same unit that I showed you the line graph for. Year 1990 is the start of the animation. That's when there were very few territories left. And I want you to see how scrub jays move into that habitat. And by 2010, there's a bunch of territories like scrunched in there, and then they all start going out again. So let me play that. Here they come, make smaller and smaller territories. By 2000, in the first cycle, in the year 2000, they max out and they go out again, and we burnt again in 2010, and in 2020 it's occupied. So does that work? Do you see it? Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder, like, I see it really well, and I don't know if others see it as well also. But yeah. So there's something about these habitats that are about 4 to 12 years post-fire that is really attractive for scrub jays. Scrub jays move in right away, fight for space, fight for territory in those optimal habitats. In a pure oak scrub habitat, they actually also completely drive whether Florida scrub jays are occupying the habitat at all. So in 1990, when we burned that unit, only about 25% of the unit was actually occupied by a territory. And then it shoots up and then is maintained pretty much at 1 and then starts dropping again. And so Florida scrub jays, again, show this like incredible habitat affinity to burnt oak scrub, not just oak scrub, but well-burnt oak scrub. So then why are they doing that, right? Like what is the underlying demographic mechanism that drives this habitat choice? What is making them flock to these areas of oak scrub that are between 4 and 12 years post-fire? So we can overlay the territory maps and our demography for those territories, and we sort of see the answer. So if you look at the number of yearlings that each pair produces, you see that those territories that are between 4 and 12 years post-fire produce significantly more juveniles or significantly more surviving adults at the end of the first year than do these early succession or late succession habitats. So they have this incredible demographic advantage. Something that I don't fully understand is even the number of breeders that each pair produces each year. So how many kids that a pair is producing will themselves end up as breeders in the population is significantly higher for those birds that are breeding in these optimal habitats. So, you know, how many grandchildren you produce is a better measure of fitness than how many children you produce. And so this is, again, there's a signal of these optimal habitats just producing more grandchildren for each pair of Florida scrub jays. So mid-successional habitats, hence, give you that demographic advantage where time since fire, you want to sort of move into a habitat when it's just starting to come back online, when the vegetation has grown up, gives you enough cover, move in there, have a territory, because those 8 years are probably going to be really, really good for your lifetime reproductive success. Okay, so what we found was that scrub jays are fire-dependent species. Their numbers peak about 8 to 10 years after a fire. Using data sets like Archbold has direct applications for how land managers outside Archbold can burn their habitats to maximize scrub jay numbers. And so we are in constant communication with both state and federal agencies in how they can burn their habitats to maintain viable populations of Florida scrub jays. And the biggest takeaway, of course, is that scrub jays not only need habitat conservation, but also active management of those habitats. All right, with that, let me come to this last part really quickly and talk about hot jays. So when I first started at Archbold in the year 2023, we had the earliest nest on record in the whole 56 years. And that got me thinking about whether climatic variation that the scrub jays have experienced over the last 50 years is affecting their nesting phenology. Now, of course, I'm not doing anything novel. Of course, there's like a bunch of ways in which climate change is affecting birds. And there are these like day-to-day effects of extreme weather on birds. There are these phenological shifts, and then there's these decadal shifts, like that stuff like Brian Weeks has shown on morphology of birds over time. I'm going to talk about seasonal effects for this talk. I'm going to talk about seasonal effects of warm winters on scrub jays. So again, this pattern is very, very well known. Warm winters lead to early nesting, and it's seen in a number of animals, like everything from black terns to northern harriers, a bunch of passerines like swamp sparrows, etc. And it's true for scrub jays as well. So using our about 40 years of data, we showed that scrub jays on average nest about a week earlier now than they did in the 1980s. And functionally, that has also meant that our internships are now a month longer, because you have to get interns a month earlier to get them trained on nest searching so they can go find those early nests also. So warm winters have these significant downstream consequences for scrub jay reproduction, and I'll tell you how. So not only do warm winters, so this is the average maximum temperature of the winter, advance nesting dates of Florida scrub jays. So after a warm winter, Florida scrub jays nest earlier than after a cold winter. The success of that first nest is also lower. And this is incredibly important for Florida scrub jays because, as is true with a lot of other birds, those first nests are incredibly important because if you survive, if you're born early in the season, you have that much longer to develop, to cache your acorns and get ready for the winter, and your survival probability is much higher based on your hatch date. So, but warm winters lead to more first nests failing than do cold winters, and hence the proportion of the chicks that are produced that fledge goes down. So after a warm winter, scrub jays just do poorly. It does increase, though, the reproductive investment that each pair puts in. So the number of nests that Florida scrub jays make every year. So Florida scrub jays will re-nest every time a nest gets depredated. So if they lose the first clutch, they'll re-nest and make a new nest and start nesting again. We've had females lay more eggs than their own body weight within a single season and have them not produce a single fledgling. So females are putting in all this reproductive investment and helping chicks get to day 3, day 5, day 11, and then failing over and over again. So after a cold winter, we have later nests, we have more fledglings, and lower reproductive investment. But after a warm winter, we have early nests, fewer fledglings, and more reproductive investment. And this is really important because there's also another well-known trade-off in birds about how much reproductive investment you make in the breeding season and your survival probability to the next year. We haven't quite done that yet, but that's something that hopefully really curious intern will do. All right, so I've walked you through the four projects. I hope I've impressed upon you the importance of Florida scrub jays as a cool study system, of field stations as important places, crucibles for science, and that's it. Like, I would love to thank all our funding agencies, all the people that have put in time and effort and blood and sweat and tears into collecting this data. Here's a pitch. Come join BirdLab. If you're interested in what we do, write to me. If you are a grad student or a postdoc who wants to leverage our data sets, write to me. If you are an undergrad who wants to go find scrub jay nests, write to me. And I'm happy to take any questions. Marge. Oh, you want a mic? I don't know.
Great talk, Sahas.
Thank you.
Oh, great talk.
Thanks.
It was really fun. Okay, this is kind of a naive question about fire ecology, which I don't know that much about, but like by managing, is it like, I guess I'm thinking about all the other things that live there, like the tortoises and the plants and stuff. And so is it like by managing for the Florida scrub jay, you're also managing in with that fire frequency for all the other things because they're all like adapted to the same environment? Or is it like historically fire was variable and that just happens to be the sweet spot for Florida scrub jay, but the tortoise might have a different sweet spot, you know?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And for a bunch of plants, their optimal time since fire is also 7 to 8 years. So at least for plants, we know that they are well matched with scrub jay phenology as well, scrub jay ecology as well. And so that way it does coincide really well. I'm not so sure about gopher tortoises, but gopher tortoises also live in a much bigger diversity of habitats in Florida than Florida scrub jays. And they're also a little more, we don't really know what drives gopher tortoise biology because they live 150 years. So yeah, I don't know. But for plants at least, yes, they're well matched.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Yeah. Okay, the back.
Thank you. Great talk. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This might be kind of a silly question, but is there any kind of like masting behavior for these oak scrub trees that is related to the fire ecology?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So these oaks are incredible because they resprout after. So they're largely clonal. So they resprout after a fire. So the fire takes out all the above ground biomass, but they have a ton of below ground biomass, send out shoots again. They start producing acorns about 4 years after a fire. And so we think that's why those habitats become that really attractive for Florida scrub jays, because they have oaks that are producing acorns. In almost the opposite end of that question is what is the bigger question. It's like, why produce acorns if you are a clonal species, right? So these guys can just send out runners really far away from themselves. And why they produce acorns is in itself a question. But scrub oaks never mast, but they also never fail completely. So there's always some acorns in the system, irrespective of what year it is. It's not as cyclical as other tree oaks out there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks. Hello.
Hey.
This mosaic habitat that then even changes over fairly short, decadal time frames seems like a good recipe for balancing selection. Are there phenotypes, either behavioral or morphological, physiological, that tend to segregate in the optimal versus suboptimal habitats?
That's a good question. I've thought about that a lot. We don't quite know because they all sort of gravitate towards the optimal conditions. So they'll like shuffle their territories so that they have some territories in that optimal area. And I think the spatial scale at which this happens is relatively small. Historically, there might have been some balancing selection because the scale of those wildfires were thousands of acres, but now it's a few hundred acres. And so they are literally a territory away, and it's a good, like, optimal habitat, and they could be in bad habitat here. So I don't think at least the way we manage it is not at a spatial scale that we can actually drive evolution. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for a great talk. I've been to the Archbold station and the Lake Wales Ridge, so it was really fun to hear about this.
Great.
I was wondering if there's any kind of relationship, possibly with a lag, between the growth pattern of the oak scrub and the population dynamics of the bird, of the scrub jay, and perhaps the fact that so many of them are clonal means there is a weak relationship at best. But I wondered, if they're bearing so many acorns, how much are they influencing the geographic range over all of Florida, and how much are they influencing the population dynamics on the Lake Wales Ridge for the oak tree, for the scrub oak?
That's a really fascinating question, and something we don't quite know about, but we are actually writing a grant to find out if the population size of Florida scrub jays is a predictor of genomic diversity of the oaks, and if Florida scrub jays, by carrying out this ecosystem service of long distance dispersal of the oaks, if they're driving gene flow in the oaks themselves. And the answer is we don't know, but we're thinking about it really hard right now.
Hi.
Yeah.
I have a question related to the helper behavior. So it's a kind of a two-part question. I don't know how much you've looked into it, but with the initial premise question of, is there a difference in the male-female input of the helpers into helping raise the young? And does that have any effect on, one, how long they're staying as helpers, and then two, maybe why females are more likely to be dispersing further away rather than the males, whereas in some systems males are more likely to be the dispersive
sex? Yes. So To answer the first part of your question, because they get so hard hit by predators, and because there are so many predators around, we try to minimize our observations at the nest. And so we don't quite know if someone is looking at it right now, but we don't quite know if there is a sex difference between whether you're a male helper or a female helper in the benefit it provides to the breeding pair. Whether that drives how long they stay as a helper, we think that they are staying on as a helper as long as they don't have a place to breed. Like I think in areas, in patches of habitat that have large patches of unoccupied habitat, birds start breeding at year 1. So it's not a lack of desire to breed. I think these habitats are saturated. Females are the dispersive sex in birds, in most birds, and so it's just sort of a more broadly phylogenetically conserved element about bird biology that females are dispersive. I mean, it's the norm, not the rule. But yeah, so females are going further. It is interesting though that dispersal distance is actually negatively correlated with lifetime fitness. So there's actually a cost to dispersing far away. So females that disperse far away tend to have fewer nestlings over their lifetime. And so we think that there is some level of inbreeding tolerance that is being built into the biology of this species, because birds that live close by and disperse close by produce these highly kin-structured populations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
About one last question. Yeah, Haley, here you go.
Hello, that was a fascinating talk.
Thanks.
I'm wondering if the birds bounce back from other disturbance with the same kind of rigor. Like if a tropical storm rolls through and downs a bunch of trees or vegetation, do they still bounce back as quickly, or do you see the same kind of patterns of recovery?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And the answer is they're not affected. We can have hurricanes, tornadoes, tropical storms going through, so you just ride it out. You can go back out the next day and find all of those individuals just fine. So they've lived in this landscape for 2 million years. They've seen a lot of hurricanes go by, and the habitat is actually pretty dense, and they can just like hunker down at the bottom of the oak scrub. And yeah, even after a fire, fires don't kill scrub jays. We actually did an analysis because a sort of a partner asked us, but we recite 98.5% of the individuals that have experienced fire the next month. So even when you have a big fire raging through your habitat, they fly away and survive. The only thing that will not survive a fire is obviously nestlings in a nest. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks again for
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.